So when you decided that, hey, this Agile thing is for me, what did you do?
Well, I would have to say I was actually kind of naive in that, I had always experienced an Agile team. And so I thought, well, everyone must work this way. And so when I went into the other organization that did not function that way at all, and it was such a shock, that was when I was like, well, talking to my teams, well, why do we work this way? We could be doing this, and why aren't we doing this? And so it was just a constant barrage of, we can make this better, and wanting, that desire of making better. And I was fortunate enough to have a manager that was open to that, and that was really when agility as a buzzword in the industry really was coming about. And so people were familiar with that, and there was a desire to go that route, and so it really naturally came together, and I was allowed to pursue that passion and really bring that about internally. And so I was asked to put together formal trainings and to help the teams and coach the teams on better ways of working, and so it just naturally led into that. And so I was able to put those two passions together, develop my own training internally. Didn't know that there was stuff available externally at the time, and so I was developing my own and working with other coworkers to do that. And it was just a natural progression. And then later on, I discovered that there was this industry around Agile external, and so that's when I started exploring that and moving out beyond just my own teams.
And as you moved out beyond your own teams, you mentioned that there was like industry available training material and things like that. How did the availability of that material impact how you worked as you moved on from team or program to program? What did that free you up to do? What opportunity did it create?
Well, it made it a lot easier because I didn't have to continually reinvent the wheel. Was able to, the essence of Agile, sharing knowledge and sharing, learnings from each other. And so was able to take those learnings from others besides just myself and be able to accelerate that learning journey much more quickly in that way. And so it made it a lot easier to do that and be able to work with others of a similar mindset to really come about better ideas for doing that and for growing teams.
Do you keep in contact with some of the early people you worked with?
Oh, absolutely, constantly. They were like family, working with those people. And that's the great thing about our industry is that, we are so collaborative that it's like once you establish a relationship with somebody, that collaboration, it brings about a natural friendship and a natural bond that you don't tend to get with very rigid waterfallish type teams where it's more about a competition with each other of proving that you're the brightest, smartest person in the room.
Yes.
Versus in a more agile environment, it's all about the cooperation and the collective knowledge and how you work better together, and that just naturally builds friendships and relationships that I think end up spanning beyond work, really.
Do you think there is a difference in organizational style between waterfall and Agile? And what do you think the key elements of those, if there are differences, the key elements of those differences in terms of how an organization behaves?
So I would interpret that as different cultures. They do tend to lead to different cultures that you see. So as I mentioned, more structured, more waterfall type organizations tend to have that more competitive culture, where you're, like I said, you're really trying to prove that you're always smarter than the other person, because typically you're your bonuses, your raises, your promotions are all based off of proving that you're better than everyone else. And so that tends to lead to a very competitive culture, and in my point of view, a hostile culture that really doesn't bring about innovation nearly as well as a more cooperative environment does. And so I tend to see organizations that do have more agility, have a more friendly culture, where people do tend to have better relationships inside work as well as outside work. So the culture that I see in a lot of traditional organizations, you have your work people that you deal with at work, and then you have your family life and your friends at home, and they're generally very separate. Where what I tend to see in organizations that have a more agile mindset or a more open mindset, those boundaries tend to blur, and a lot of your friendships, a lot of your workmates tend to be friends outside of work as well, and really tends to lead that way. So it tends to be a much more pleasant environment to work in, and I see a lot less attrition in those environments because people actually enjoy who they work with, they enjoy what they're working on, and the environment just is a much more friendly environment to work in.
So the relationship to work changes, is that?
Yeah. It tends to be less of a, I go to work because I have to make money to support my family, and it tends to become more of a, I go to work because I enjoy what I do, and I do it because it's a passion, and I get to do it with people that I enjoy working with, and friends, and in many cases family, that become like family, friends that become like family, as opposed to I just go to work and I deal with you because I have to, and then I go home to my real family and my real friends.
When you look, if you look at organizations today, and let's say you're going to visit a brand new company that you've never been to before, and you're interviewing with an executive who's saying, hey, I want agility, I want agile, whichever agile that is, right? What are you looking to hear from them that makes you confident that success is achievable?
Yeah, so I ask them, what outcomes are you really looking for? And if I hear things like increased productivity, increased efficiency, things like that, then that generally is a hint that they're probably not really wanting what agility has to offer. They're looking for something that I may not be interested in participating in. So I'll usually drill in on that. What does increased productivity mean to you? What does increased efficiency mean to you? Are you looking to just cut costs, or are you really looking at focusing on how do I make my teams more efficient at delivering real value? So there's a difference between productivity and productivity. Are you looking for productivity as far as just churn whatever I tell you out as fast as you can? Or are you looking for teams that have the ability to identify the gold nuggets amongst all the rocks laying in the landscape and focus on how to extract just that gold nugget, ignoring the noise around it? If that's what you're really looking for, then that's what agility has to offer. And that's what real agility is. And it's not necessarily about having the fastest teams in the world. It's how can they quickly identify the true value and maximize that value as quick as possible.
So one of the common things people talk about when they talk about agile is, you get more for less. What is really behind that? What do you think is behind that? Do people work twice as many hours? Do they write faster documentations? Do they type faster? What is it that has come to mean more for less from a perspective of an agile organization?
So I would say the misinterpretation of more for less is that you're getting more output for less money. You're getting people just working harder and they're churning out more output. But that isn't what it really is about. As I mentioned, it's empowering the teams to be able to think, and instead of just be order takers of just deliver exactly what I tell you, the more for less is I'm going to tell you my problems, I'm going to tell you the issues that I'm having and what I need solved, and then empower the teams to be able to think about the solution behind that. And rather than disrupting them with the noise of just do what I say, and what I say may be actually the wrong solution, or there may have been a better solution that the teams could have thought of, instead of giving them that solution, I'm going to give them my problem, let them think on that, let them come up with the best solution for that problem. And by doing that, I empower them instead of just my one mind, or let's say even we've got a team of 10 experts, but if I release that out to 10 different teams of 7 to 10 members, I've now got 100 plus brilliant minds that are able to come up with a better solution than I ever could with my 1 or 10 minds. That's where you get the more for less, because they're going to get that better solution and they're going to ignore the noise, and we're going to figure that out more quickly than if I had given them what I thought was the best solution, only to learn later that it wasn't, and now we got to go back at it again. We got to fix all the bugs. We got to really implement a whole different solution because it really didn't solve the problem that it should have, and that's all waste. So we eliminate that waste by allowing the teams in the first place.
So there's a lot of conversations also go around about efficiency and effectiveness. So it's from what you're saying, I hope you don't mind me repeating back to you some of the stuff that I'm hearing, is that the actual real gains, and tell me if I'm wrong, the real gains of moving towards an agile environment or an organization with agility is being more effective at solving the problem, not more efficient at delivering stuff.
Correct. And all too often, organizations are looking for efficiencies as opposed to effectiveness, because they misunderstand it. They think that efficiency equals effectiveness, and it doesn't. Efficiency is all about how fast can I churn the stuff out. That's efficiency. And can I get stuff churned out the door faster? If I give you this solution, can you get it out the door faster? That's efficiency. Ignoring whether it's the right solution or not. Effectiveness is giving the problem, and now how fast can you get the correct solution out the door? How quickly can we eliminate the wrong options to figure out what's the right option? That's effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Working on and finding and identifying that right solution as quickly as possible, by not by narrowing down and just getting that point-based solution, but by exploring all the possible options and eliminate the ones that aren't correct so that we can narrow down to that correct solution.
So the world's getting more and more competitive every day, and there is a dozen companies who do everything, right? How do you think that fits in to this situation where there are 20 car companies, there's like 10 different supermarkets, there's probably hundreds of bicycle companies in the world? How does this agility and this effectiveness fit into that if I'm a business? What is it going to give me?
So it kind of depends, because it depends on what the marketplace looks like, what your competitors look like, and what your purpose that you're going after is. If you're in a marketplace with a bunch of competitors that haven't figured out agility, well, the benefit that it gives you is that now your people are able to come up with and test out various different options with your customer base much more rapidly than your competitors, who are just focused on what they think is the right solution, get that out the door only to find out that it was wrong, and now go back to the drawing board and take a long time reinventing, get it out the door. Instead, you learn how you can go through and test all the various options with your customers or with representatives of the customer base to more quickly identify what is the customer really truly wanting and looking for, what really solves their problem. And even in that aspect, there's a misunderstanding in that people think that being customer focused is always about going to the customer and asking them what they want. That isn't the case. If you ask, Henry Ford said, if I asked my customer what I wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse, not an automobile. So yes, we do go to our customers, but we go to our customers to validate our assumptions. So collect the problems that they want solved, ideate on what the various options are, and then test those options with the customers and see how they react and respond to that. So that's customer focused, is focusing on, yes, solving their problems, but not necessarily letting them dictate the solution to us, but help to validate our assumptions of what we believe would be a good solution for their problems.
So Agile is becoming extremely popular in IT over the last 5 or 10 years, since, well, for a while now. There's a lot of business people who say Agile's for IT. We don't need Agile. We don't do Agile. What do you think of that statement if a business person comes up and says, hey, oh, that's an IT thing, you don't need me?
Yeah, so I think that's true if they don't want the ideal competitiveness that they can have in the market. If all they're looking for is that efficiency as opposed to effectiveness, then yes, that's true, sure. Just leave it in IT and they'll be great order takers and they'll churn out the orders as fast as you can give it to them, but they're missing out on the bigger benefit of how more effective can they be in the marketplace. How quickly can they test those ideas and assumptions from a business perspective? So they're missing out on what I term business agility. The ability to come up with an idea for my marketplace, come up with an idea for my business or my industry, and then test those ideas and really see from a business perspective, not just a pure technology perspective. It could have nothing to do with technology. So agility isn't technology. It's not DevOps. It's not the best tools that I can put in place, the best technologies that I can put in place. That's not agility. Agility is being able to say, I have an assumption that I think is going to provide value, and then testing that and learning and seeing, does it really provide the value? Do I need to persevere and continue down that road, or do I need to pivot and change my assumptions or change my proposed solution against that assumption? And that's really the business agility, where we can do that from a business idea perspective. It requires a lot of cooperation with IT, and if we do that in coordination with IT, then we get the additional benefits, not just on the business ideation side, but now also in the implementation, and we're able to leverage the power of our IT and engineering departments to help more rapidly develop those ideas and the potentials that we can test with on that, as opposed to, like I said before, just being the order taker of here's the one solution, go implement, and then we find out that it was wrong.
So if we continue to go down that business track, Agile sort of grew up in the change environment, right? And change in terms of enhancing IT products, now moving into business change. What elements of Agile do you think can go beyond IT and business change? If I'm looking at, the supermarket shop floor or the credit card processing team, who have all fantastic tools, they don't need to change, what elements of Agile can actually help those people achieve more value for their customers? It's
the whole learning cycle. And as Eric Ries terms it, the lean startup, going through and asking the question, what is my hypothesis of value? How do I measure against that? And let's test the options and see if that's real. So you can do that no matter the industry. A retail industry, we can, ask what's going to bring bigger sales, what types of displays are going to attract the customers best, what should those look like. Well, let's try two different ones in different areas of the store and see what they're attracted to. Now we're starting to learn and see what they're attracted to, and we can start to formulate then other displays that simulate the one that was more attractive and brought about more sales. So things like that. And it doesn't matter the industry, it's all about that learning cycle. Come up with a hypothesis, figure out how you're going to measure that, and then test against the different ideas and options that help fulfill that benefit that we're looking for.
So do you believe, no, that's a closed question, I have to rephrase that, sorry. I have bought a chain of bicycle stores. 100 bicycle stores across Texas, for example, and I've got all my IT systems. They're all great, mobile apps and all of that sort of stuff. If I wanted to bring more agility to my stores, what are the things that I should be thinking about in terms of organizationally and behaviorally that I should do differently as the new owner to enable that agile culture of experimentation to flow? What should I be doing? How should I be thinking?
Well, for example, it depends if you're a bicycle retail shop where you're just buying from a supplier, or if you're actually in the industry of creating a new bike or whatever. But let's say that you're a retailer that buys from other suppliers and resells. Well, we may have an assumption of what we think are going to be the best-selling bikes, but let's test that out. Let's try, rather than buy a whole huge bulk set of a bunch of them, let's buy a couple of different types. Let's put up some displays and see what sells better in one store. Now, the hypothesis is that that particular bike, that sells the best in the one store is going to be our best one to invest in. Well, that may or may not be true, because we also have to analyze, what's our customer base, what's the region, what does that look like. So we got to take all that into account, but we can set up these different test cases and see what the response is in that, then determine, okay, for the different customer base, for the different regions, this particular bike was the best one. So now let's go do our bulk orders against that and supply that in that store. Maybe a different store in a different area of the city or a different region has a different customer base. Maybe one's looking more for the road bikes and another's looking, they're up in the mountains and it's more mountain bikes that they're looking for. So how do you set up those different tests to see what's actually going to be the best in that area, that region, for that customer base?
If you look forward, say, 10 years, and 10 years sounds like a long time, but it's not. Right, we've both been in that agile space for.
Unfortunately, the older I get, the faster it goes.
Yeah, exactly. That's for sure. So agile has changed. The world has changed, but agile has changed a lot in the 10 years. If you follow that curve, what do you think agile will mean to people 10 years from now? What will they be? Will they be thinking about daily stand-ups and retrospectives and things like that when they think about agile, like so many people do today, or do you think they'll be thinking about it in a different way?
Daily stand-ups and things like that, those are mechanisms. Those are specific tools that we implement for the learning process. It's all about the learning process. I would expect that in 10 years, the processes that we put in place, those toolings, may evolve and change, but the core of the learning cycle is going to be the same. The focus is going to be on how do we enable learning as quick as possible? How do we test our assumptions, be able to narrow that down to find out what really is the right solution for that issue? So will daily stand-up and iteration planning and stuff like that look the same? Maybe not. Maybe there's going to be a more efficient way of doing it. I'm not sure. In a true agile fashion, we just have to test out different ideas and see if we can improve upon it, or if it continues to be the same.
that's a really important point, I think. And it's given me another question, which I hadn't planned for, but nonetheless. So if a organization's adopting a methodology, it's safe, less, Scrum, whatever it happens to be, and they're new, and at what point should they try to go beyond what comes in the training or on the website or in the book or wherever? How should they assess for themselves when is my time to take the training wheels off, as it were, of the whatever comes in the books?
So I would kind of, I like to use the example of learning to drive a race car.
I'd love to use that example. Love to learn to drive a race car.
Yeah,
This is a good start.
But if I want to be a race car driver, excuse me, I don't just jump into a Formula One car and go out and hit the track and go 200 miles an hour. I'm probably going to start out on a local go-kart track somewhere and learn the basic mechanics of the go-kart. From there, I may jump up into, just a slightly larger car, maybe a normal car that you see on the street, but on a racetrack somewhere. Probably going to hire a trainer, a coach that knows better than I do what to do, that can instruct me on that. And they're probably going to have a specific set of tools, i.e. a car that they use. That instructor may have a different car at one track versus another instructor that has a different car at another track, because that's what they're familiar with and that's what they're comfortable with. And that's okay. What I probably am not going to do is jump from one instructor to another instructor to another instructor to another instructor that all have different cars, and now I'm getting confused as to what's what. Because in essence, they're both trying to achieve the same thing. It's mastery of the basics on how to race. Once I've achieved that with that particular vehicle, then it becomes easier later on to test out the different vehicles and figure out what is really going to work best for me. So when do you determine, and how do you determine when it's time to move on from your chosen methodology or framework? Once you've felt comfortable enough with it that you can do it without thinking about it. It's truly become your culture, which that's what culture is. It's what we do without thinking about it. It's just our natural way of working. And the only way we build that is through constant repetition. And once you've gotten to that point where that's just your natural way of acting and doing, now's time to start exploring and seeing and saying, maybe a different car might be better. Let's try it out. But I don't just jump away from the car that I'm familiar with, because that can be even worse. You jump away into a car that you're not familiar with, that everyone else tells you is the best out there, and now all of a sudden you end up in the guardrails in a crash because you weren't familiar with all the minutia details around that vehicle. So you have to spend time exploring and experimenting and learning the details before you can figure out which ones really are best for you. So
I might do things like change to a different steering wheel because, different controls on it, or different wheels, and slowly evolve my car and my style as I go.
Exactly. And how would I equate that to an organization that's doing an Agile transformation or testing out different Agile frameworks or methodologies? I would say, don't do it with all your teams all at once. Don't just tell everyone, okay, this is our new thing that we're going to do. Test it out with one team. Test it out with one group, or whatever. Take a look at that and say, test it out with one ceremony. Let's change one thing and see. And that's the true Agile learning journey, is asking, we have a hypothesis, let's test it out with one controlled group and see what the result is on that. Is it better? Is it worse? If it's better, great. Let's expand on that and let's test a little bit more and keep going. If it's worse, okay, we know we need to pivot from that and go back to what we were or try something else. So that's when and how you would start to progress on from that. I would not, right from the beginning, I'm not going to go to that racetrack with that instructor and say, you know what, I don't like your car. I'm going to bring in my own car and I want to tweak this, and I don't like that you call that the ignition. I want to call that something else. I don't like that you call that the brake and you call that the accelerator. I like it to be called the gas pedal and the stopping pedal. Or, you know, I'm not going to put my own words on everything. I'm not going to customize the car, especially if I'm customizing it just to keep me in my own box. If I don't feel comfortable going 100 miles an hour, I'm not going to go and customize the car and put a restrictor plate on it that only lets me go 40 miles an hour because that's what I'm comfortable with. And now I'm never actually learning to get outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to go to the instructor that knows what he's doing and knows how to implement their specific vehicle, and I'm going to trust them on that. And I'm going to learn to adopt their terminology, learn to adopt how they teach me to utilize that. So that's a big mistake that I see and that I've personally experienced with several organizations that I've worked with is, well, we got to customize everything. We got to make it ours. And now, you know, you walk into the room and you got 5 different people that have 5 different definitions on one particular term, and nobody's really speaking the same language anymore. And, you know, you end up with 10 different customized cars on the track, all customized in different ways, that are trying to race 10 different races, and nobody's getting to the finish line, and we're all wondering why. Well, because we're running into each other and causing crashes all along the way.
There's a lot of concern in the Agile community about cargo cults, right? And that certain frameworks are perceived as either encouraging or creating these things. What do you think causes organizations to fall into that trap? Which I'm not.
Well, I think what causes that is our natural human tendency, which is also, unfortunately, what led initially to traditional organizational structures that really promote, you know, the rock stars. And that's all about, I have to be viewed as the smartest and the best and play into my ego.
That there is only one answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, there's a combination of those in the industry that are constantly trying to differentiate themselves and stand out as the rock stars and having the answers that everyone should come to. And so they are very constantly promoting and saying that my way is the only way.
Yep. So we're doing this to ourselves in a way.
In a lot of cases. And unfortunately, it's really counter-agile in that it's a mindset that stops learning. It says that at some point in time you've achieved the ultimate, and my way, of course, is the ultimate way. And so once you've done my way, you don't need to learn anything else. And I think that's unfortunate because it teaches us to exit that learning journey and to stop doing the learning cycle of saying, you know, is it potentially better than what we have? And having that relentless improvement mindset of always asking, never saying I've achieved agility, but always saying I'm on the journey and now what's the next better step? So I think that's one problem, is that we do have some people within the industry who want to be viewed as number one in the industry. And the other aspect of it, which also is our natural human tendency, where we put the blinders on and we say, well, this is what I'm familiar with, this is what I've done, and it worked in the areas that I'm familiar with. ignoring that there's a broader world out there. And just because something worked in one particular instance does not prove that it works across the board. And so there's certain things that work in certain areas and work for certain reasons that may not work in other areas or for other reasons. And so we need to understand that depending on the situation, depending on the climate, depending on the culture, we may need to employ different tools at different times. You can never start one organization's journey based off of where another organization ends or where they're currently at. Because every organization, and I see that a lot, I don't like calling out specific frameworks, methodologies, whatever, but you know, a lot of organizations are looking at the Spotify model and saying, look at what they've achieved. And now if we just mirror that, if we just rubber stamp that, and we'll start exactly where we perceive they've ended, we'll all be great. Well, I'm not saying it's not a bad model. There's a lot of good things about that model. There's a lot of good things about other models out there. But they went through a specific learning journey to get there. And their starting point was also very different than the starting points of a lot of other organizations out there. So we can't assume that I can't look at a doctor and say, you know, I really want to be a doctor. I see everything that you've gone through, and now, boom, I'm just going to go and get the learning. I'll read the textbooks and not go through the internship, but I'm going to miraculously be an expert surgeon because I read the books that you wrote and I read all the same texts that you did.
Watch some YouTube videos. Always watch lots of YouTube videos.
Exactly. So, you know, that doctor, that surgeon, they didn't just go to school and learn the basics. They went through an internship where they practiced. That's why we call it a medicine practice, you know? Yes. And they really learned how to be a good surgeon. Well, as an organization, we have to do the same thing. Yes, we can look at the end result of another organization, or at least where they're currently at, because hopefully it's never the end, they continue to grow. But we can look at where they're at. We can look at a particular framework or methodology that's been implemented somewhere, and we can learn from that. We can learn the basics and understand it, but we're still going to have to go through our own learning journey. And we're still going to have to start where we are at, not start where somebody else was at. And how we adapt that, you know, one heart surgeon has a different technique that they like to use to do a bypass than another heart surgeon has. They're different. Is one better than the other? No, not necessarily. They're just different because that's what works for them, and that's what they know, that's where their journey brought them to, and that's what they're comfortable with. So can they learn from each other? Maybe, probably. Communicate, and they might start to adapt some variation of each other's techniques and come up with a whole new different technique for doing that. That's how we learn and grow together. We should do the same thing in the Agile world. It isn't that one framework is necessarily better or worse than another. It might have evolved for a different purpose or from a different starting point and be beneficial for organizations at a different point in their journey. Can we learn and grow from any of them and all of them? Probably, but we have to be able to figure out that there are some that were geared more for smaller groups and smaller organizations and have the luxury of not having to deal with a lot of the large complexity in a lot of larger organizations. And there's some that tend to lend better towards those larger organizations that have to deal with a whole lot more dependency on each other and collaboration and cooperation that needs to take place. And so how do we make sure that we're looking at the right subgroup for what works in our organization and what's going to bring us down the learning journey that we need to be on?
So if you've been on this journey for a few years now, and so I just like you to cast your mind back to when you started. So just imagine you're coming out of college. You're well on your journey. But imagine there's some new guy. There's a new person coming out of college, and they're looking at at the world and they're looking at Agile as something they're interested in, what advice would you give them? What would you say to them to do? What should they do first?
What should they do first? One, don't get sucked into exactly what you were talking about earlier of, having to find the one right solution. Don't get sucked into that battle of my framework's better than everyone else's framework. Explore, look at the different ones and ask the question, why does one organization say that this is working for them? Why does another organization, did it not work for them? And learn from that and see, start to learn and get an understanding of the different opportunities and the different tools that you have at your disposal, and when and where one tool works better than another, so that you can get an understanding of that. A hammer, one particular hammer is not the best hammer for every nail, and so you have to start to learn which hammer works in which situation, and which nail is the best nail to use in which situation.
So, thanks for your time, Jim. Is there any sort of last advice you would give to a new coach? Somebody's tomorrow they're going to walk into their first team. What would you suggest? What advice would you give them? If they're sitting down here instead of old grey me.
Never stop learning. Never assume that you've arrived. Always understand and know that I can do something better, I can learn something else, and I can grow from where I'm at right now. But also, don't be afraid, and just make sure that you know that it is a learning journey and you're not expected to be perfect. You're not expected to go into that situation and be the best coach. And don't try to have that mindset, and don't try to pretend that you are, because your teams will see through you very quickly. And if you go in with the attitude of everything, at least that would be the first indicator to me that you're not a real Agile coach if you think you know everything, because a real Agile coach knows that they don't know everything and that it is a learning journey. So just understand that, and don't try to be the know-it-all.
Okay.
Just try and get everyone on the learning journey with you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.